So how did I get into crypto? Essentially, I started off in a very traditional finance kind of background. I went to University of Guelph, studied quantitative finance. Um, Basically stumbled into a job at Goldman Sachs as an equity sales trader. Kind of got bored of the traditional structure, so I started suggesting, why don't we start building a desk to start to trade crypto? That was about 6 years ago. It was a little bit too early for everyone else. We built a team, but essentially the bank said we don't have the risk appetite for this, and they shut it down. So pretty shortly after that, I resigned from Goldman, went over to TD to start trading a book of derivatives. Still found that way too antiquated. And then gradually started shifting into building incubators and started trying to settle equity trades on blockchain. And essentially, as we all know, like trying to use blockchain to try to improve existing infrastructure it's quite difficult to adopt, because essentially you end up cutting out a lot of the middlemen that aren't really required, right? Like that's kind of the beauty of blockchain, is that it does everything we do better, right? It's faster, it's more effective, it's more secure. So as soon as I started suggesting that to banks, they essentially said we're going to have to fire all our middle office people who like basically stamp pieces of paper during the day. And we can't do that. So after I had the opportunity to work at TD for like 3-4 years, I found I had an opening to move into a venture capital firm that focuses on blockchain. And from within there, I started building my own startups, the first one being NFT BAZL, which essentially is an NFT company that uses NFTs to authenticate physical and digital assets. So we basically transfer ownership of physical art, watches, cars, and also create digital assets, but of the investment grade status. And we've created a whole marketplace around it, our own wallet, and we have our own tech. So that's basically how we do it.
Quite the extensive background for sure. So you definitely have all the technicalities of the finance and are now integrating this into a new space. So very curious, what is it that that allowed you to gravitate, or why, or that brought you to have an affinity towards NFTs specifically?
So I think with like anyone who's in the investment space typically will look at an investment for its fundamental value, like the intrinsic value. What is the floor of that asset?
Yeah.
And people traditionally struggle with, let's say, Bitcoin, for example. I myself am not a Bitcoin maximalist. I think blockchain is absolutely the future, and cryptocurrencies will be the future, but I don't think it's going to be in the iteration that we're seeing right now. So with NFTs, what I think is beautiful is that there is a fundamental floor value for the NFTs we're starting to see coming out now, because there's value to them. They have some kind of utility. Either you can bring them into the metaverse, or they're backed by a physical asset, or they come with some kind of membership. And that's what makes these NFTs valuable. Like I have a friend who just spent an absolute fortune purchasing a Bored Ape Yacht Club. And some people would say that you're completely insane, but for him and his business model, it completely makes sense, because now he has access to this entire network that he would have never had an opening to otherwise. And essentially, that's also what I'm trying to build out of NFT BAZL. I'm trying to create NFTs that have an intrinsic value, so that a traditional investor can actually understand what's the asset behind this. So when, let's say, you're investing in an NFT, you know that you're getting a canvas, you know that you're getting a reputable piece of art, or a piece of jewelry or watch, or something that's actually tangible in the real world. And once you start using blockchain to track that value and to track that ownership, then in my opinion, that's where you're really using the blockchain for what it's good at, which is significantly more than just like moving digital like files around, right? Like you're taking ownership and utility across. Mm-hmm. So that's where I see the value.
Okay, so as you said, a book price, a fundamental value that's backing these assets, something that people can hold on to much more, and is much more real. It's not solely speculative. So then in that case, what was the inception for NFT BAZL? Was there a spark moment? Was it gradual over time education that you started to learn like, oh, this is really going to make a dramatic impact in the world? Just please take me through that process.
Sure. So I think the first thing was when I was in banking, I was trying to say, why don't we just use blockchain to move stocks across, right? Like if it takes 2 days to settle an equity trade, how do we have the tech to essentially transfer money across the globe effortlessly? And and we're not leveraging that in the largest market in the world? Why is FX still done with a 2-day settlement? It makes absolutely no sense. So I started thinking about that. I literally have a pitch book from 6 years ago saying, why, instead of creating a 1 of a million coin, why don't we just make a 1 of 1 coin and transfer ownership of that coin? And then we can basically track who holds what at which point. And that was essentially what an NFT became. So once NFTs got to the market, I was like, okay, cool, let's start transferring alternative investments, which are much more liquid, which don't necessarily fall under securities law, and find ways to utilize that, essentially the same tech that we're using to transfer stocks, but do it on blockchain and do it with alternative investments. So then essentially my mother is an art dealer, and I said, okay, cool, I have access to really cool art. Let's see if I can work with artists to authenticate their art and sell it using the blockchain. So what we've done is I've partnered up with these guys who manufacture NFT chips, which essentially hides the private token key in an actual chip. We seal these onto the back of the canvases and we transfer the ownership using that. So in order to purchase that canvas, you have to buy the NFT. So we started testing it out with art, and it was a massive success. Basically, we, like, just a fun fact, like what percentage of the art market this year was represented by NFTs? It's somewhere between 15 and 20%, which is absolutely ridiculous. So I'm trying to leverage that and get people more accustomed to what crypto is. And beyond that, it gets rid of the whole secondary fake market, which is also what NFTs are really good at, is now you can distinguish the difference between a file that's copied and pasted and who owns the original IP for that file. And that's where it becomes really interesting.
I see. Yeah, quite the process for sure. And I'm glad that you had access to your mother's works to be able to create that. So there's definitely sentimental value there as well. Really, I'm sure urged you to push forward with it. As you alluded to, it's been a crazy year for NFTs, especially in the art space. You see the collectibles growing immensely. You've mentioned also Bored Ape Club. So what do you think, what is your forecast for the new year for 2022 with respect to NFTs and collectibles and so forth?
So I think a lot of the drops that you're seeing coming out now are going to struggle. I think people are kind of trying to just ride the wave and make money very quickly. And typically when that happens, people get greedy, and that's when you start seeing corrections in the market. So I think in the new year, you're gonna see a lot of essentially projects disappearing, or crypto millionaires also disappearing, because they're gonna have a hard time selling a lot of these files that they own, or tokens that they own. So this leads me back to my original thesis that now it comes down to fundamental value, which NFTs actually hold intrinsic value to them. So that's where the metaverse becomes really interesting, because if you have NFTs that you can bring into the metaverse and you actually bring your utility, phenomenal. I think those will succeed extremely well. If you have NFTs that tie to a physical asset and it's kind of a deed of ownership, I also think those NFTs are going to explode over the coming years. Because if you hold an NFT that ties to like the deed of ownership to a property, phenomenal. That's like, no matter what happens, you still got that property behind it. So you've got intrinsic value insulating you from that. And in terms of digital collectibles, I think the real utility and the real attraction is anything that goes into the metaverse. I think you're living 5 years ahead if you own anything in the metaverse.
Oh, yes, I see. Okay, yeah, very, very interesting. We are starting to see the shift, as you said, into actual deeds and items that can be represented through NFTs to display ownership. And I think right now there's a big hype train when it comes to the collectibles themselves. And unfortunately, some people might just be holding the bag at the end of the day because you're just relying on the next person to buy it from you if there is no intrinsic value. So you're seeming to solve that problem there. We do have a question from Yip. She asks, what questions should beginners ask more often before they invest into certain projects?
Yeah, sure. So this is something I struggle with a lot, because I know a lot of people will look at these projects and say, oh, they have a phenomenal marketing campaign, and lots of people are going to buy into this because of the influencers behind it. I struggle with those kind of theses, because if you're relying on an investment because it's well marketed, then you don't really have anything more to go by, right? If the marketing disappears tomorrow, there's no value behind the asset. So I don't think it's all about the marketing. I think it's really about, A, who's the developer of the project? What is their track record? have they successfully brought projects to market, and what is the value they're trying to bring investors, what not the value they're trying to bring to their own pockets. And that's something you've really got to be able to distinguish. If they're giving you something that will serve you utility, if it either gives you access to something in the real world or in the metaverse, then you've got a solid project on your hands. If you're looking at something purely because it's got a cool influencer behind it, I think you need to reevaluate.
So the hype isn't enough.
No, I'm very fundamental. As you can tell, like the way I speak, I come from a very traditional background. So
Exactly.
I think I think history has a tendency to repeat itself, and a lot of people made these kind of mistakes in the tech boom, in the finance boom pre-2008. A lot of people made a lot of money, but a lot of those people also disappeared overnight because the market corrected itself.
Exactly.
So you have to try to think a couple steps ahead.
So on that line of thought, then, what do you see as the next 5 years being for NFTs, metaverses? Like, how do you see us actually immersing ourselves in that world?
Yeah. So, okay. So in terms of NFTs, I think the real value in the next 5 years will be transfer of ownership. I think the first guys who figure out how to do a land transfer using an NFT are going to crush it, because you're basically going to get rid of all the back office paperwork, all the like the land transfer fees. All of this is going to disappear. You're basically going to have it instantly done using blockchain, and your wallet will essentially act as a DocuSign for your paperwork, which is brilliant. The secondary art market, watch market, diamonds, all this stuff is going to become super clean, as long as people figure out proper ways to authenticate these assets. And then the cool thing is where I think like the metaverse crosses over the real world is when you start taking physical assets with 3D renderings and bringing them into the metaverse and being able to show them off. So I'm already working on multiple projects like this, but let's say a jeweler is creating a diamond or an engagement ring for someone. Imagine as you manufacture that wedding ring, you take a 3D rendering and you can literally put it on your avatar in the metaverse. So I think that's going to be a really cool crossover, and you're going to start seeing people do this with cars and houses, and entertainment spaces, all this kind of stuff. We're working on projects like this all the time. We have a ton of inbound because everyone's trying to find a way to break into it.
Yeah, well, I can see that being extremely alluring, because look at Rolex and Ferrari, for example, right? A lot of people are purchasing it for the name and not for the underlying technicalities or mechanics itself. So I'm surprised that haven't already been like Rolex metaverse type of watches that people wear as an avatar, because people would purchase it for roughly the same value, I would assume, being that it's a real Rolex, and especially if you have a limited supply in the metaverse, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So like literally that's like one of my big projects now is I'm working with these kind of brands. So one of the recent projects I did was with the Sls Hotels. And we basically are creating a metaverse property for them, but also created an NFT drop around all the assets that the hotel already has. So as you purchase these NFTs, you actually gain access to like hotel rooms, and you gain access to like the pool bar and the beach area, essentially getting the VIP membership of the hotels, but cooked into your NFTs. And now my next step is literally trying to talk to watch manufacturers and car makers, chipping the asset so that I can authenticate it. So essentially you just tap your phone on it and the NFT shows up. But then also being able to take a rendering of that watch and bringing it onto your avatar. And the main issue is people just don't know how to do it.
From a technological standpoint?
Yeah, I think let's imagine you go to like Patek Philippe in Geneva. Those guys don't understand how blockchain works. They don't even understand what NFT means. So essentially, they just need someone who can go in and really explain it in very simple language.
Okay, so what do you think the conversations are right now with respect to traditional finance, such as Goldman Sachs?
Right now, so it's funny because I still talk to the digital asset team there quite a bit.
Yeah, always keeping ties,
Always.
just learning what's going on. Yeah, what are those conversations
So
like?
they're investing a fair amount, but they're putting it like very in the back end. They're not really revealing too much about what they're doing. I think in terms of what like financial institutions are going to start doing is they're going to come out with their own stable coins, because if the government isn't doing it fast enough, the government, the banks will do it, and then the government will have to adopt it. But essentially what JP Morgan did, which I think is genius, is they essentially years ago came out of a stable coin that was run internally. So let's say I put $10 into the bank and I just told my advisor to put $10 into whatever stock. What would happen is I would send my money to JP Morgan. JP Morgan would give me back one JP Morgan coin, and that JP Morgan coin could be used within the whole JP Morgan ecosystem. So I think those kind of like the ability to move money faster within an ecosystem is where the banks are going to start heading. And then once they have those coins, you start opening DeFi, you starting like DeFi protocols. And that's literally the exact same thing as starting a savings account, but because it's decentralized, you're getting a higher interest rate. And so as long as those coins are backed by someone like strong, then earning 10 to 12% on a stable coin versus earning -1% in Europe, it's not a bad sales pitch.
It isn't. And yes, there will be faster transaction fees. However, isn't it defeating the purpose when you have, for example, like JP Morgan, a private blockchain? The premise of blockchain is the transparency and is the decentralization. So because you have a private blockchain, would that not, again, defeat the purpose of what the entire ecosystem of blockchain is trying to do?
Yes, but even now, like I would argue that even now we still got, it's kind of like centralized decentralization what we're experiencing now, right? We still have a lot, like how often do crypto projects launch and disappear overnight? How often do you see tokens go up to 1 million and then disappear? Like I would much rather that I can invest in an ecosystem that is backed by someone I trust, and actually like if something goes wrong, I know they're assuring me, versus going onto the internet and hoping no one scams me. So that's when decentralized tech becomes more centralized is when you're going to start earning a lot more trust, and then you're going to start seeing bigger players coming into the space. It won't be as much of the Wild West as we have it right now.
I see. So it's the credibility that's going to preserve that for them, rather than just this wild, chaotic scene of, it might go up, it might not.
Exactly. Based on like literally like one of the first questions, like how do I know which is a good project or not, right? Like there's got to be some kind of filter protecting us.
Absolutely. Mark here, he has a question which asks, which NFTs are currently undervalued in your opinion?
Which NFTs? Okay, that's a tough question. I think, look, in my opinion, I think digital art in many ways is, there's a giant discrepancy between what defines digital art. And I think right now, a lot of people are going for these generative NFT drops because they are making a lot of money. I think that's way overvalued. I think that market's going to take a massive slap over the coming months. And I think the NFT drops where it's truly like a one of one or something more unique, or it comes from a reputable artist, or it comes from a company who's trying to bring value, like who did something like this. Like when there's artists like this guy called Warb from the Netherlands, who's doing these like extremely rare, beautiful one of one 3D drops. Those are like, in my opinion, that's valuable because A, it's rare, B, it took a significant amount of time to generate, and C, it's got utility tied to it. So these kind of NFTs, I think, are really undervalued, and people are overlooking them because there's quick money to be made in the generative stuff.
Yeah, because overall scarcity isn't enough, and the utility and community need to be there.
Exactly. So I think right now we kind of need to recenter ourselves a little bit, because I think these generative drops are getting too much.
Yeah, well, we're starting to see it go in that direction where you see a lot of these prominent figures like Mike Tyson, for example, start to have like sessions where you can box with him if you purchase his NFT. So it's not just a quick drop and then you lose your funds on the hope that it might go up, but it's actually the fact that, look, you get real world value out of this, and these are the perks from owning the NFT, and they're enticing enough to build more community around them, because the metrics of followers or how big your fan base is not enough anymore.
Exactly. Like literally, we did Floyd Mayweather's NFT drop. And we basically got a pair of signed gloves from him. So actually, the gloves came unsigned. We chipped the gloves. We basically like sealed the chip into the stitching, and that glove was essentially authenticated. So what happened is whoever bought that glove got a meet and greet and a live signature on the glove, and they were authenticated pre being signed.
Wow.
So like that was a really cool NFT drop, and we did that in June. But yeah, exactly. Like that was a physical asset tied to a digital authenticity. And that brought significantly more value than just a digital file.
And when you scan this, is that what you see being embedded into the metaverse?
Yeah, so those weren't in the metaverse because that was way too early. Like no one was doing that, but now that's what we're doing. So now um, we have Floyd's boxing shorts that he wore against Logan Paul. Those have also been shipped. Those are framed. We brought them to Dubai with us. And essentially those come with a 3D piece of art of Floyd Mayweather wearing them. So if you purchase the physical shorts, you get the metaverse model that goes on display in your place.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. It's emerging in so many different ways, in so many ways that we have probably yet to project, yet to assume.
Exactly. There's literally so much to figure out.
Wow. Wow. Exciting stuff. Yip has a question here. And she asked, what currently is the biggest tech challenge for these metaverse projects? What part of the value chain needs to be solved so we can go for large scale adoption?
So one thing that we've recently made an investment in is Metaverse Architecture. So actually like learning how to build like nice places in the metaverse. Like if you guys walk around Decentraland, there's some really cool stuff, but there's also a bunch of stuff that looks like a 5-year-old made it on Minecraft. So I think teaching people how to actually get into the space and how to like actually turn something out of nothing, because right now it's literally just blank land, is going to be the tough part. I'm working on a bunch of projects right now where it's literally just like, how do I build a home? So it's very, very simple projects, but people just don't know how to get into it.
Oh, okay, I see. And then there's the interoperability issue as well, right?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
And then there's also the interoperability issue, the ability to retain assets across different dimensions and different platforms.
So a lot of there's another project I spoke to, I'm blanking on the name right now, but there are projects right now who are literally working on taking, let's say, a Decentraland asset and being able to take it into a different metaverse.
There we go.
Being able to cross over, and they actually like change the formatting on the spot.
Oh, that's a step in the right direction as well then.
Yeah.
So what do you see are the greatest risks then for the NFT market as a whole? Where would the most potential be when assuming these risks?
So I think the biggest risk, and also like the biggest door opener, is going to be either regulation or some kind of centralization. So if the NFT market gets regulated to any capacity, or if they stop, basically they cut off projects saying this falls under a securities, I think you're going to open a lot of doors, because as once regulation steps in, that's when I think you're going to start seeing long-term growth and like stable growth come into the market. And until then, I think you're going to continue to see like the Wild West that we're seeing right now. Like how often do you go onto OpenSea, see projects going for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then the next week, like look at the Bored Ape, like it sold for $68 last week, when the average is like hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
So no one's even checking if someone's putting up the wrong price, which is a little bit crazy.
Wow.
So I'm a true believer in centralized marketplaces, which are like NFT BAZL's market, for example, is something that we monitor on a daily basis. If someone makes a mistake or places a wrong bid, we literally like check with them. And we literally will like we partnered with like DHL to make sure that any painting that's shipped is authenticated before shipping it. And that like the artists have a reputation that we're working with, and that they come from galleries and all this kind of stuff. So I think having a hands-on approach, rather than like this kind of Alibaba kind of just anything goes and you can sell anything you want, that's where you're going to start seeing like true, like almost trust. Like I think trust is a really big thing in this space, and a lot of people are missing it.
But doesn't that go against the concept of being a trustless system, where you won't even have to trust, and that will supersede the concept of trust?
I think that works when people are making a lot of money, and when things are kind of just like super volatile and you have the opportunity to do that. I don't think it will last, because if you want to see mass adoption, you have to create trust. Like you have to create some kind of regulating body. Like look at the stock market in pre-2008, right? Like bankers were crushing it. No one else understood how to get invested, and people became corrupt because of it. Right. Look at the real estate market. Look at all mortgage-backed securities. How that the entire industry blew up, and it was essentially because no one was keeping a proper eye on it. Right. I
Okay.
think we're going through something like that right now, where people are just launching projects, bringing assets to market without really understanding what they're bringing.
Hmm.
The minute we start saying, okay, wait, slow down, let's like actually make sure what we're doing is legit, that's when you're going to start seeing markets go from 0 to 100 back to 0, and in the span of a week from 0 to 100, but over the span of 2 years, that's going to be the big difference.
Okay, so it's a longevity game for sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yip asks here, how does one know though which metaverse will prevail in the future?
That's, you see, so the metaverse topic is quite interesting because it depends now on whose metaverse will essentially be have the most utility in it, and also be the most attractive to users. Like, my personal bet is I think Facebook's going to do an incredible job of whatever they come out with, or Meta will do an incredible job. Like, it's like saying like MySpace was the future of social media years ago. Like, MySpace was the future in terms of the tech, but it wasn't there yet, and people came out of newer iterations of it. So Decentraland and all these guys are phenomenal, and I love their projects. But in 3, 4, 5 years, like, a new project could come out and absolutely demolish it.
Hmm. Yeah, as Yip has mentioned, the network effect. It's a winner take all market.
Exactly. So one person's going to figure it out, and it's going to, like, I think we're going to see a couple of projects come out in the next few years that are going to wipe out what we have right now.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's not always the first mover.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, Ori, thank you so much. Please share where people can find you, and post your information in the chat.
Sure. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Really appreciate your time, and best of success, continued success with NFT BAZL.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.